In Arkansas City, Kansas, on the 6th of April, 1889, Harlan Trask sold off his stock, his wagon, his breaking plow, and, at the tail end of the sale, in front of perhaps 90 men in a wagon yard smelling of horse and creosote and the cold spring mud of the Walnut River bottom, the hand of his only daughter. The narrator will say at the outset that this had no standing whatever in the law of the state of Kansas, and that every man in that yard knew it, and that they let it happen anyway, which is the part worth remembering. What Harlan Trask actually offered, in the careful phrasing of a man who had rehearsed it, was his consent, the exclusive right to court Sadie Trask, with a father's blessing attached, and a wedding understood to follow, the money to go against $3,100 of mortgage he owed to a lease broker named Creed Mallory. He called it a subscription. Nobody made him call it anything else. Sadie Trask stood on the tailgate of her father's own wagon in a good dress she had put on for exactly this purpose. 24 years old, black-haired, dry-eyed, and entirely awake to what was being done to her. 200, said a wheat farmer from Bolton Township. Sadie turned her head and looked at him. The narrator has spoken to 4 men who were in that yard, and they described that look in 4 different ways, and every one of them used the word cold. She did not say a word to him. She simply looked at the man, steadily, the whole length of a slow 10 count, in front of 89 other men, and the wheat farmer from Bolton Township examined his own boots, and then withdrew his bid. 250, said a widower with a store on Summit Street. She looked at him too, and let the silence run, and then said, pleasantly, Miss Vinson, your first wife is buried 11 months, and you have not yet troubled to have the stone cut. I would think about that a while before you spend money on a second one. The yard laughed. Mr. Vinson did not bid again. She had been doing this for 3 years, and she was extremely good at it. 3 times her father had arranged a match for her, and 3 times she had wrecked it. The first with a temper. The second with a truth spoken at a dinner table in front of the man's mother. And the third in the September of 1888 by simply getting on a horse and riding to Wichita, where Harlan Trask found her 9 days later working in a hotel laundry and brought her home in a hired hack without one word spoken the whole 40 miles. She was not, whatever Cowley County said of her, wild. She was a woman who had worked out at 21 that the only property she owned in this world was her own reputation for being impossible, and she had spent 3 years investing in it. The bidding got to $475, and that was Creed Mallory, who did not look at her at all while he bid, which told her more about what he actually wanted than anything else that happened that day. And then a voice from the back of the yard, near the gate, said 500. He came through the crowd without hurrying. He was a big man, 36 years old, in a plain coat and a good hat, dark-skinned, black-haired, clean-shaven, and he stopped a proper 8 feet from the tailgate and took his hat off and waited. Sadie Trask turned the whole force of it on him. She had never once failed to make it land. Amos Fontaine looked back at her for the length of that slow 10 count, without so much as shifting his weight, and at the end of it, he smiled. Not a smirk, and not a leer, but the plain, unguarded smile of a man watching somebody do a difficult thing well. Ma'am, he said, that is the best I have ever seen it done. Something happened in Sadie Trask's chest that she could not account for and did not enjoy. You know what you are bidding on. I know what your father says he is selling. I have got a fair notion it is not the same thing. He turned the hat once in his hands. My name is Amos Fontaine. I run cattle on Cane Creek, 60 miles south of here in the Osage Nation. And my Aunt Josette keeps a house there with 2 spare rooms in it and no man under the roof. I am bidding $500 to your father because it is the only way anybody in this yard is going to get you out of it today. And because I have watched you run off 9 bidders in 20 minutes, and it occurred to me that a woman working that hard to be left alone has probably not been asked one question in 3 years. The wagon yard had gone quiet in a new way. "You are an Indian," said Creed Mallory, from 4 rows back, and there was a sound through that crowd like wind moving. "I am Osage on my mother's side and French on my father's, and I hold a grazing lease over 11,000 acres that a good many men in this yard would like to hold instead," Amos Fontaine said, without turning around. $500, Mr. Trask, cash, today. Take it or do not. Harlan Trask took it. He took it in front of 90 men, from a man he would not have shaken hands with the week before. Because $500 was $500, and Sadie stood on that tailgate and watched her father count it, and understood. Finally, and completely, a thing she had suspected since she was 13. Then she stepped down off the wagon on her own and walked over to Amos Fontaine and said, loud enough for the yard, "You have bought my father's consent. Mr. Fontaine, you have not bought me. I am 24 and there is not a court in Kansas that would say different, and if you have got a notion otherwise, you had better have it out of your head before we clear the town." She lifted her chin. "I will ride south with you, because I would rather be in the Osage Nation than in this yard. If you want anything more than that, you will have to ask me, and I will very likely say no." "That is about what I expected," said Amos Fontaine. "There is a bay filly in the 3rd pen I bought before you came up. Nobody in this yard could get a hand on her. I would be obliged if you would ride her home, since I cannot, and my aunt will laugh at me for a year if I lead her 60 miles. Sadie Trask looked at him for a long moment. Then she went and got the filly. They crossed the line into the Osage Nation the following afternoon, south over the Core and down through Blackjack Oak and tall Bluestem, coming green after a wet march. And the country opened out into the long rolling grass prairie of that nation, which is some of the finest cattle country God ever laid down, and which the Osage had bought and paid for with their own money out of the sale of their Kansas lands, a fact Amos Fontaine mentioned exactly once, in passing, in a flat voice, and did not enlarge upon. The filly gave Sadie trouble for 9 miles, and then quit giving her trouble, which Amos watched happen and said nothing about. Josette Fontaine was 66, and she was his mother's sister, and she had walked out of Kansas in 1872 with the rest of her people and had buried a child on that road. And she came out onto her own porch on Cane Creek and looked at the white woman on the bay filly for a considerable time before she said anything at all. "You paid $500, she said to her nephew in English, evidently for the visitor's benefit. "I did. For a woman who has told half of Kansas she will not be married. That is the general size of it." Josette Fontaine turned to Sadie. "Then you will want to know where you stand. And I am not going to be sweet with you, because sweet is no use to anybody. This is my house, and you are my guest in it, not his. And there is a bar on the door of the west room, and it works. He does not come under this roof after dark, and he has not since he was a grown man. You will find a good many people in this nation who will tell you that bringing a white woman onto Osage land invites exactly the trouble it invites, and they will not be wrong, and you may hear it said to your face. If you cannot bear that, say so now, and I will have him take you to the agency and put you on the stage. And if I can bear it, then you will be fed and let alone, and expected to work," said Josette Fontaine, and I will find out inside a month whether you are worth what he paid. And I will tell you either way. Sadie Trask, who had spent 3 years making herself unbearable so that nobody could get near enough to hurt her, discovered that she liked this old woman enormously and had no idea what to do about it. She stayed. The weeks that followed had a shape to them, and the narrator will not pretend they were eventful, because their quiet was the whole of their worth. She took the horses. That was the arrangement inside of 9 days, and it was not charity, because Amos Fontaine ran 400 head on 11,000 acres with 3 hired hands and a remuda of green stock nobody had time to bring along properly. And Sadie Trask could do a thing with a young horse that none of the 3 hands could do, and knew it. She did not gentle them fast. She gentled them the way she had taught herself at 15 in a corral in Cowley County with nobody watching, standing in the middle of the pen, doing nothing at all for the better part of an hour, letting the animal work out on its own account that she was not going to chase it, and then asking one small thing and quitting the moment it was given. Amos Fontaine watched her do that with the bay filly on a morning in May from the rail for 40 minutes, and then walked away without speaking, because he had just understood something about the woman on that tailgate in Arkansas City, and he did not trust his own face. He noticed things, and did not say them. He noticed she stood square to anybody who spoke to her, always, feet planted, in the manner of a person who has been raised to expect a thing to be thrown. He noticed she ate as though somebody might take the plate. He noticed she had made herself frightening so young and so thoroughly that she genuinely did not appear to know she was also funny, and that when Josette laughed at something she said, she looked startled every single time. And she noticed things about him. She noticed he spoke perhaps a fifth as much in Arkansas City as he did on Cane Creek, and that the difference was not shyness. She noticed the 3 hands, 2 Osage, and 1 black man out of Texas named Purchase Ivy, deferred to him without a word ever being raised. She noticed he had a Latin grammar and a stock breeding treatise on the same shelf, and had plainly read both. In the last week of May, the filly caught her across the back of the hand with a hoof, not badly but deep, and Amos brought the carbolic out to the rail and cleaned it himself because she could not reach it left-handed, and it took him a long 4 minutes. Neither of them said anything for the whole of it. He held her wrist in one hand and worked with the other, steady as a man doctoring a horse. And Sadie Trask sat on the rail and looked at the top of his bent head and discovered that she had not been touched deliberately and without wanting by another human being since her mother died in 1878, and that she did not have the first notion what to do with her own face. When he finished, he tied it off and let go of her wrist and stepped back a full pace, which he did not have to do, and which she noticed. "You will want to keep that out of the dirt," he said. "I will do no such thing, and you know it." "No," Amos agreed. But it wanted saying. They fell into the habit of the last hour of the day at the corral rail, and there they talked, and Sadie Trask found herself in June doing a thing she had not done since her mother died in 1878, which was to say what she actually thought out loud to a person who might repeat it. "Mallory did not come to that sale for a wife," she said one evening. Amos turned his head. He never once looked at me. Not in the bidding, and not after. A man buying a woman looks. She was watching the filly. "My father owes him $3,100 against 640 acres of deeded wheat ground 4 miles north of the line. Deeded, Miss Fontaine, not leased, not allotted, the only deeded ground within 40 miles that touches this nation's north boundary. He does not want me. He wants a son-in-law's claim on that section, because a man who owns ground on the line has a place to stand, and a place to stand is the whole of what those boomer outfits have never had." She looked over at him, You did not know that? No, said Amos Fontaine slowly. I did not. Before the trouble came up the Cane Creek Road, and it did, from precisely the direction she had named, there were 6 good weeks on that place, with a bay filly coming along and an old woman on a porch who had made up her mind about a white girl a good deal faster than she let on. If you have stayed with this story this far, stay a little longer. What comes next is the part that changes everything. And if you find yourself moved by tales of love that survived the worst the West could throw at them, the bell beneath this story is how we keep meeting like this. Creed Mallory moved on the last Tuesday in June, and he moved twice in one day, which was how he did business. Harlan Trask came down the Cane Creek Road at noon with 2 men and a Kansas deputy who had no authority whatever 90 miles inside the Osage Nation and was counting on nobody knowing it, and demanded his daughter back, and repudiated the sale, and said a great deal in that yard about a white woman living among Indians that the narrator declines to set down in full. And at 4 o'clock that same afternoon, a rider came from the agency with word that a complaint had been laid regarding the Fontaine grazing lease, that questions had been raised as to the fitness of the lessee, and that the agent would want to satisfy himself concerning the residence of a white woman upon Osage land under Fontaine's citizenship, and that the matter might take some months to settle. 11,000 acres. Amos Fontaine stood in his own yard and did the arithmetic of what a lease held up for some months would cost him and Josette both, and then he turned to the 4 men on horses. Mr. Trask, he did not raise his voice, which is what men from that country do in place of shouting. Your daughter is of age, and she is under my aunt's roof and not mine, and she has told you herself, twice now, that she is not going anywhere. There is no consent of yours left in this. You sold it in a wagon yard for $500 in front of 90 men, and I have got the paper you signed. That paper is not worth, no, it is not worth anything at all, and neither was what you did to raise it, and I have never once said otherwise. Amos looked at the deputy. You are 90 miles off your ground, and the men who have authority here are the agency police and a deputy United States Marshal, and I will send for both if you would like to discuss it properly. Now the 4 of you are going to ride north, and you are going to do it before dark, because after dark you will be trespassing in the dark, which is a different matter altogether. They went. It took a while, and there was talk in it. Sadie Trask had heard the whole of it from inside the west room, with the bar on the door, and she came out afterward and did not thank him, because she had understood in about 4 seconds what he had just put at risk, and knew perfectly well that thanks were no use to a lease. What she did instead was ride to the agency herself the following morning, 31 miles, alone, on the Bay Filly, and spend 2 days there being extremely polite to clerks, a thing she had no natural talent for whatever, until she had in her own hand a copy of the complaint, the name of the man who had laid it, and a plain statement from a clerk of what the agent would actually need to see in order to be satisfied. She came back on the second evening and put all 3 on Josette Fontaine's kitchen table. He needs to see that I am here lawfully and not being kept, she said. That is all of it. 2 sentences buried in 9 paragraphs of Mallory's poison. Josette Fontaine looked at the papers a long while. A month, she said. I said a month, and it has been 11 weeks, and I will tell you now as I said I would. She folded her hands. You are worth a great deal more than $500, and my nephew has been in love with you since a wagon yard in Kansas, and he is not going to say so, because he has worked out that saying so is the one thing that would make you run. So I am saying it, and now it is said, and you may do as you like with it. The talk came 4 nights later at the corral in the first week of July, with the grass gone tall enough to lay over in the wind. She told him hers first, and she told it plain, which is how the deepest kind comes out. Her mother had died in 1878 when Sadie was 13, and Harlan Trask had been a hard man before that, and had nothing whatever left to soften him after. At 21 she had understood, sitting at a table listening to her father discuss her with a man 40 years old, that she was an asset on a ledger, and that no amount of being good was going to change it. So she had stopped being good. I made myself into something no man in that county would take, she said. On purpose, and it worked, and I got 3 years out of it. But you cannot build a thing like that and then put it down when you want to, Mr. Fontaine. I have had a sharp tongue in my head so long I do not always know anymore which part of it is armor and which part is just me. She was looking at the filly. That is what I am afraid of, not my father, that there is nothing under it. Amos Fontaine was quiet a long moment. I was 19 years old in a store in Coffeyville, he said, and I corrected a man about the weight of a hide. I was right. 3 of them took me out back for it, and I did not walk properly for a month, and my father's people were in Kansas, and my mother's people had just been marched out of it, and there was not one soul in that town I could go to. He turned his hat over in his hands. So I quit talking in white towns. 19 years of it. They call me the quietest man in Arkansas City. And they think it means slow, and I have let them think it, because it is cheaper. That is my armor, and I will tell you the same thing you just told me. I have worn it so long, I could not always find the edge of it either. He looked at her. And then I stood in a wagon yard in April and watched a woman use hers out loud, in daylight, in front of 90 men, and I have not been the same since. And I would like you to know that it was not pity, and it was never $500. The wind went over the grass. Josette told me, Sadie said. Josette would. She said you would not say it because saying it would make me run. She is generally right. She is wrong about that one, said Sadie Trask, and crossed the 4 feet of ground between them herself, and the narrator sets that down plainly. For there was not a thing in the world compelling her to do it. What passed between them then was brief, and it was the first kiss either of them had known in a long while. And what broke open in her was not longing, but the plain, unbearable relief of being looked at, entire and unarmored, by a man who had already seen the worst of what she could do, and had smiled at it. Later, at the rail, she asked him whether he had an Osage name. I do. Will you tell it to me? Not tonight, said Amos Fontaine. That one is not bought, and it is not asked for. It is given, and I will know when. Creed Mallory came up the Cane Creek Road on the 11th of August with 9 men, and he did not come to talk. He came because a lease complaint takes months, and a man in a hurry cannot wait months, and because he had worked out the same thing Sadie had worked out about jurisdiction, only backward. That Amos Fontaine, on Osage ground, had the agency police and the federal marshals behind him, and Amos Fontaine 4 miles north on Kansas dirt had nothing at all. So the whole of Mallory's plan was to get him across the line. They took him at the horse pens at 6 in the evening. He was shot through the right thigh in the taking of it, and the narrator will state the harm and not linger on it, and they had him roped and across a saddle and moving north inside of 4 minutes. Purchase Ivy was shot in the shoulder trying to stop it, and went down in the pen. Sadie Trask was at the house. She heard it, and she came out, and she did not go for the rifle over Josette's door, because there were 9 of them, and 1 of her, and she had spent 2 days in June sitting in an agency office, learning exactly who in that country had the authority to do anything. She went for the filly. She rode 31 miles to the agency in a little under 4 hours in the dark, on a 3-year-old bay horse she had brought along herself out of a stock pen in Kansas. and she got there at 10:30 at night, and she did not ask for help. She stood in a lamplit office in a torn skirt and told the agency police, and a deputy United States Marshal out of Wichita, who happened by the grace of God to be at the agency that week on other business. Precisely 3 things: the names of the men, the direction they were moving, and that Creed Mallory of Arkansas City, Kansas, was at that moment an armed trespasser on the lands of the Osage Nation, engaged in the abduction of an Osage citizen. That last was the whole of it, and she had it exactly right, and it was the only sentence in that room that mattered. They caught Mallory's party 1.5 miles short of the line at 4 a.m. 11 Osage police and 1 federal marshal against 9 men who had counted on there being nobody with authority for 60 miles. And the arithmetic of it was so plainly against them that not one shot was fired. Amos Fontaine was on the ground with a rope on him, and had been for 10 hours. He kept the leg. He walked stiff on it for the rest of his life. Purchase Ivy was 3 months mending and worked 40 more years on that place. Creed Mallory was tried in the federal court and went to the penitentiary for 11 years, and the 3 men who had done the shooting went with him. And the lease complaint died the day the indictments were read, the agent having discovered a considerable enthusiasm for closing the file. Harlan Trask was not among the 9. He had known, and he had not come, and Sadie was never able to decide whether that was decency or cowardice, and said so once and never again. Her father lost the 640 acres to the mortgage in 1890 and moved to Missouri. She wrote to him twice. He answered neither letter, and she stopped. And the narrator will not pretend that did not cost her something. They were married on Cane Creek in the October of 1889, recorded with the Osage Nation and in the district court both. Because Sadie Trask had spent one afternoon in a clerk's office in June and had developed opinions about paper. Josette Fontaine lived 11 more years and spent most of them being right about things in the loudest possible way. The horse operation on Cane Creek was Sadie's from 1891 onward, and it was not a hobby. She bred, broke, and sold saddle stock across 3 states. And by 1897, there were men riding into that yard from Fort Worth who had never once heard of Amos Fontaine and asked directly for his wife. The bay filly foaled 11 times and lived to be 26. And there was not a horse on that place in 1910 that did not come down from her somewhere. Their daughter was born in 1891, and their sons in 1893 and 1896. On an evening in the June of 1892, at the corral rail, with the grass laying over in the wind exactly as it had 3 years before, Amos Fontaine told his wife his Osage name. She never once repeated it to anybody, not to her children, and not on her deathbed in 1938, and when people asked her about it in her old age, for the story got about, the way such things do, she would say the same thing every time, and it is the last thing in this account worth setting down. It was given to me, Sadie Fontaine would say, which is not the same as being got. I spent 3 years of my life making sure nobody could take a thing from me, and it turned out the whole trick was standing still long enough to be handed something instead. I would not have believed it in April of '89. I would not have believed it of myself at all. If your heart has ever leaned toward a story where love arrived quiet and stayed long enough to change everything, then this story was for you. Out on the tall grass country of the Osage Nation, where the wind keeps the only memory of what was, the love between Amos Fontaine and Sadie Trask became the kind that does not need anybody to remember it to be real. Though there were men in that wagon yard in Arkansas City who told it for 40 years, and every one of them started in the same place, which was the moment the quietest man in town took his hat off and smiled. If stories of frontier love that endured through hardship, prejudice, and the kind of silence only the West knows speak to you, follow the lonesome trail for more. Here, the love stories are quiet, the courage is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail.